Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Ambiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. We are exploring one of the most popular buzzy buzzwords in business today, gamification. Gamification, as many of you already know, is the concept of using game mechanics to drive desired behaviors. But it's not just about adding a few fun and games to the workplace. When done right, gamification can have a profound impact on employee engagement, motivation, productivity, and yes, even company culture. According to the survey by Anadea, using gamified activities can increase employee motivation by as much as 48%. Furthermore, 9 out of 10 employees also report increased productivity when they use gamification. So today we are joined by Lauren Fitzpatrick-Shanks, CEO and founder of Keep Wondering Out Loud, aka Keep Wool. Lauren Fitzpatrick-Shanks is an entrepreneur, award-winning engineer, tech leader, writer, mentor, wife, mother of 2, former gymnast that loves to flip around, and she's an avid conversationalist. She spent 14 years working at 5 Fortune 500 companies, holding various leadership roles in design, system testing, product creation, staffing, software program management, and operations. As a Black millennial woman in engineering and tech, she is certainly no stranger to breaking barriers and being the first or only. Lauren is the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Kansas's Aerospace Engineering Department and the first Black woman to win the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics International Design Competition. She's a recipient of the Women in Technology Rising Star Award. She has an MBA in Operations Management from the University of Scranton, and she is now the founder and CEO of Keep Wool. Happy to have you here, Lauren. You have quite a wonderful background.
Thank you so much, Megan, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's dive right in, shall we? So how important is it for companies to gamify their employee training and engagement initiatives right now?
So I first would like to start with kind of defining gamification versus games versus simulations, because a lot of people are like, what does it all mean? Is it all the same thing? So the importance is high, but it's also important to understand what it all means and make sure that we use the terminology in the right way, right? So with gamification and simulation in games, it's kind of, there's a continuum for them. So they kind of overlap, they cross over, but there's still bits of nuances. So with gamification, we can think about it as game elements and mechanics of things from games being added to situations that weren't meant to be a game. So an example could be at one of the companies I used to work at, people didn't like doing their mandatory compliance training, or they didn't have time, not necessarily didn't like to, but it's that thing you have to do each year. And it's kind of like, okay, I'll get it done. It's due at the end of the quarter. Like, I'll get it done. But to incentivize people to do it quicker, they started having horse races, and it was pitting one organization against another organization. So one business unit or team against another team, and showcasing them on this leaderboard of this horse race, and the teams completing their training as quickly as possible. So that's a kind of an example of gamification. But if you think about simulations, for example, you can think of like your VR or your AR, augmented reality type of situations where you're kind of put into place of or like an airplane simulator. My background's in aerospace.
Yeah, so right. I was like, we're going there. Yay.
We'll go there. So like an airplane simulator where you're put in the position of what you're actually going to be working on and doing. And it could be game-like where you're unlocking some different levels. A lot of times you have that in video games and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a game. So you can think about that with simulations. And then if you think just simply games, you can think of games have rules. They have a framework. They have a structure, and everyone's meant to follow that. So when you play Monopoly, there's rules to the game of Monopoly. You can't just make up your own rules unless everyone participating agrees to that made up rule, right? Which typically they don't.
Right? I was just going to say, if you're out there in the work trends community, can you relate or what?
Yes. So it makes me think of things like when you're playing Uno and it's like, wait, can you double up on Uno? Or can you do like all these things? So those are different things with games. So when playing games, you have to think about it as we all are starting on equal footing. So each of us has an opportunity to really win. And as humans, we want to win. We have a desire to win. Even if we're not competitive, no one wants to lose or wants to fail. So even if you're not competitive, games hack your brain to say, but I want to do well. Like I want to put my best foot forward. So with games and gamification, it really taps into the brain's reward center. And typically games require that quick thinking that disarm you, or they require that strategy. So although some are more competitive than others, it really gets any person that's participating in a game to tap into that competitive side of their nature. So just to go back to like how important is it for companies to gamify their training initiatives and things, it's dependent on the company, but I think it's very high up there in importance if you want to see the engagements and the stickiness of the results of what you're providing that training or that engagement in, because a game kind of gives you that visual vantage point, like directions give you, like some people will give you directions, go 3 miles due north and turn right. But for others, it's like, hey, go up to the corner that has the baseball field on it and then make a right. It sticks in your brain better than other situations. So games kind of play in that nature as well. So really giving employees a recall factor and something to like relate to when they're actually going to execute on the learnings that they're having, or whatever your initiative may be, that holds high importance when it comes to games, and it makes it fun.
Do you think that all teams can benefit from gamification, or is this sort of like an only certain type of team thing?
Yes, so I think all teams can benefit from gamification, but the type of games played or the gamification being done well. And so being done well is very important. So there are games that are created with the outgoing, hyper-competitive person in mind. And then there are games that are created with the intention of meeting each person where their personality type lies. Typically, those type of games require training in that methodology or that approach to gameplay.
So what you're really trying to boil it down for us on is you gotta be prepared and thoughtful. If you're out there and you want to gamify and you want to get into the game, so to speak, think first, act next.
Absolutely. 100%. You can't just apply badges and leaderboards to just anything.
And we know we've done that before and failed miserably. So, I hope that if you're out there in the work trends community, you're going to take some of the sage with you, because I know that there's so much goodness happening in this tech right now. It's crazy good. Give us an example of how gamification has been successfully used in team building.
Sure, that's a really good question. We've worked with teams of all different complexities. So that's what's really amazing about games and gamification, because they can be used to bring people from different generations and different cultures together. So really the span of whatever uniqueness of a human being there is, you can bring them together with games. We've all played games before in our life. And like I said, we all have that innate desire to not fail. So we've worked with matrix-based teams, C-suite teams, multidisciplinary teams, teams of all makes and molds are utilizing Keepwell's game suite to develop exceptional teams. So an example I can give of how it's really worked for team building, I'm thinking back to a team that utilized Keepwell for a team summit. And so they wanted to kick off their team summit and get everyone in a good headspace. So this team was a global enterprise team. So this is another reason why games can be really great right now, especially this post-pandemic world where we have these hybrid type of teams, or you have Some people are still fully in person, some people are fully remote, or you got a hodgepodge of the two. But games can be utilized in any kind of scenario. So this was a global enterprise team that it spanned 3 countries, 3 continents, 4 different time zones. And so this team was the definition of your distributed team. And they used our game from our game suite called What If to kick off that summit and lay the foundation for employees to really share their thoughts and feelings without judgment, to really build that trust within each other and promote creative thinking, because this was a more newly formed team. So the objective of our What If game is to really open the minds of teams by removing the limitations we all tend to subconsciously impose upon ourselves because we're human. And this game encourages individuals to think beyond everyday reality and tap into that place of imagination and creativity. And the outcome of this gameplay and having this be the kickoff really was that it brought this team that hadn't been working together, that had brand new members. Like, this summit was supposed to implement some of their brand new members into the team. So it brought them all together from different backgrounds, and they were able to really create that social connectedness and learn more about each other, create that safe space for sharing, and really enable building trust and doing it in a fun and an interactive but also insightful way of learning. So that's really my example that I can give for how it's really used for team building. We can expand our minds beyond, your ropes course or your escape rooms or your trivia, but really something that's going to deep dive into what team building really means, and that's elevating the connectedness and the productivity of that team.
So how can we ensure that a company's gamified initiative is inclusive and encourages high performance from everyone?
That's a really good one. That's a really good question, because you think about that and every person's unique. So how do you ensure that, right? That you're making sure you're inclusive of all the different edge cases that you can have. And I'll take it back to some research. Like, according to Gallup's research, $1 trillion a year is lost on voluntary turnover. And 52% of those exiting employees are saying that their manager or organization could have done something to keep them. And it's not until people are already out the door that companies are asking, how can we retain this talent, right? But games can assist in being proactive when it comes to retention and truly meeting the needs of every employee. So if we think about it with Keep Wool and like being thoughtful in how you're creating your games or how you're creating your gamification initiatives, Keep Wool's purpose is to provide contextual details into the person behind the employee, behind the parent, behind the partner, or whatever label we choose to place upon people, and allow others to grow from their learnings of what they're hearing from each other. So we utilize psychology-based games that emphasize that storytelling. So every one of our games allow for self-expression, even the ones that have a clear focus on productivity and development. For example, we have a game called Forming, and that focuses on the forming stage of team development. So the forming stage involves this period of organization and getting acquainted and stuff, and uncertainty is definitely high during this stage of team formation, and people don't know which questions that they should be asking each other, what information they should be pulling out of each other. Everyone's kind of not wanting to step on each other's toes, wants to be great, so teams don't know what questions to ask to really build that foundation of trust and fully express themselves, their thoughts, their ideas, and needs. And so we created a game that helps be able to build that foundation for growth and understanding. So when we're thinking about this, it's creating games that allow people to showcase what's inherently their personality type and build the framework of your initiative, of your game or gamification initiative around that allows flexibility to incorporate all the different edge cases of the type of people that might be playing that game.
So this all sounds great. but what are some of the potential risks here?
Yes, that's a good question because you think about it, and like I said before, some people are game folks and some people aren't. And typically when you think about games and things, you think about that more addictive personality of wanting to win, wanting to conquer, right? So of course there are risks to everything. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there weren't some risks to this. So some people by nature, when they hear the word game, they're immediately turned off because they don't like competition and they just don't want to be put in that position. They may have a preconceived notion of what gameplay may look like and feel that playing is a waste of time or that they won't learn anything from it. And it's just like a fluff time filler and you're not going to get anything from it. So you have all those things of risks when you're deciding to play a game or when you're deciding to create initiative for gamification. And so a lot of people will say, well, make it optional, make it something that isn't mandatory. And I think that that is a good idea if it is something that's really meant to just be more for a morale boost. But if it's for actual learning and education or training in skills that people need to improve upon, then I think it makes sense that you are very thoughtful in what games you're incorporating and how you're incorporating the gamification. Having a full process around it. So it's not just playing the game, but having a full process and outputs beyond that gameplay and having reflection and growth with accountability and follow through should happen to really mitigate those risks that you're looking at.
Oh, that's a great response. And, clearly you're very passionate about this topic and you're in it. And I can feel it, and I know the audience can too. These are really exciting times. Speaking of, what do you think the future holds for gamification in the workplace? What's next?
Yes, that's a great question. Our team actually recently attended the largest international conference for talent development, and we had an exhibitor booth there. And on our banner, we had the words game centric, and we had the word play on that banner. And people were flocking to our booths because these employees that are there attending this conference, their companies had sent them there on a mission of how do you incorporate some of these new trends, these new things that are going on. Gamification is not new. It's well over a decade old of gamification in the workplace, but it takes a little more time to get things especially into the enterprise space, right? And so they're coming to us, they're flocking, and they're like, how do we incorporate this into our talent development initiatives? And just for the future of work, if we're thinking about this, keep Wool, we're using games to bridge that gap between learning and doing. And when we say that gap is really understanding, and that gap is practice, and that gap is improvement in our soft skills, those social skills, those interpersonal skills. And Deloitte actually predicts that the soft skill intensive occupations will account for 2/3 of all jobs by 2030. And those type of jobs will grow at 2.5 times the rate of jobs in other occupations. So that means companies are going to need to improve the soft skills of the employees that they currently have. And so that's a major trend for this future of work. Because if you think about it, it's like we have to improve these skills. And these are skills that are hard to work on. If we really think about it, the soft skills are hard. They're hard to work on. They're not things that come intuitively. You got to practice it. And so gamification, simulations are fun, creative approaches to learning, to practicing, to retaining that information. And if we think about it, I mean, we all began our educational and learning journeys through play. I have a 2-year-old and 5-year-old.
There you go. And we've come full circle, everyone. Well, listen, Lauren Fitzpatrick Shanks, I want to thank you for stopping by today. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much. I loved it. And like you said, I'm very passionate about it, but it's also fun.
Hey, thanks for listening in to the Work Trends Podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with your friends, your colleagues, and don't forget, tune in to our next episode when I'm going to be catching up with another very interesting guest. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.